Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabila Kid. Hello, Shaka.
I am hugely terrific. How are you,
I'm doing well.
the academic kid?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, but what happened? It looks like, when I look at you, it just looks like I'm looking at myself.
I'm looking up to you, my friend.
You must be in good company, don't worry.
A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka and ask us some pertinent questions. Today we'll be talking about a wide range of issues, but before that, let's start on a sad note. Our dear friend, a friend to this show, to Straight Talk Africa and all the other shows here at the Voice of America, Dr. Suleiman Nyang, passed away yesterday, and would like to pay a special tribute to him, and our deepest condolences go to his family. Shaka, the passing of Dr. Suleiman Nyang, this is a guy, a remarkable guy who has been on your show several times, not only on your show, but he has been like an in-house analyst for the Voice of America. Your thoughts?
First of all, to be honest with you, Paul, I don't think I can frankly find the right words with which to express myself about the late Dr. Sulemani Yang. Suleiman was a colleague. He was my big brother. He was my intellectual brother. He was a teacher. He was a role model. Yeah. He was a fiercely Pan-Africanist. He was a man that who had hopes that someday, at least in his life, he would see Africa develop into a major power, into a continent that he would feel very, very, very proud about. It's very unfortunate that he has passed away before realizing that. He's not only someone that contributed to Straight Talk Africa, but I have to say among the top three that I can actually put my fingers on, he was one of those people that remarkably contributed and supported Straight Talk Africa. I can put him in the same company as Emila Woods, and last but not least, Professor George Aite. Professor George Aite. These were three building blocks, three key people that have contributed enormously to the development and the success of Straight Talk Africa since its inception. We're talking about a program that began on August the 2nd, the year 2000. Without these people, Straight Talk Africa probably wouldn't still be on air. We had so many opportunities and sometimes, in fact, exchanged some social amenities, as you know. He sometimes invited us, along with our other friends, including, of course, someone that I refer to as my brother from another mother, Paul Cisco. We would go to Silver Springs, where he had a seat at the diner. He liked the diner. And remember, he took us for lunch or dinner at the Cuban restaurant, where I like to eat the Cuban beans. And I can also remember that I, together with one of my former bosses, both at UCLA when he was editor of the Makasagabe Papers Project, and then here at the Voice of America, Dr. Gregory Alonzo Pirio, popularly known as Greg. I call him the kid from Fontana, California. He calls me in turn the kid from Cavalry. We would invite Suleiman and actually go to Arlington, near where I live, and we would go to what used to be a Brazilian restaurant, and now it is a laundromat.
Yes.
It's very unfortunate. we would go there and we'd eat this Brazilian meat and you name it and stuff like that, and talk about Africa and talk about the world. This guy was remarkably intelligent. He was a guy that I would refer to as a mobile archives, really, or a walking database for that matter. But above and beyond, he exuded humility. He was down to earth. And mind you, this is a guy who came from the Gambia. But to be very honest with you, his country, if there was such a country, it was Africa.
A former diplomat as well. He also served as a diplomat before getting into really academia.
That is true. And he lived in the United States for very, very many years, several decades.
You know what is remarkable? I did a profile of him in maybe about 7 years ago, and he told me how he arrived here in the United States. He came in 1962.
62.
That's when he first arrived here.
That is very
Went through the school system, and he started, I remember him talking about how he started teaching at Howard University in 1972.
1972?
Absolutely.
He
was one of the lucky few people who came, I think, during that time when I think it was Kennedy who had opened up America for Africans, giving scholarship, like Obama's father coming through the same thing. So he was one of those lucky few students who came from Africa and benefited from the gifts that America has given so many of us.
Very interesting. When you talk about 1972,
yes,
I am looking at a young, dashing paratroop lieutenant. That was Mike Sully, when I still had my slave name, Mike, before transforming into Shaka Sully.
In terms of legacy, when you look at his contributions to Africa, his contribution in terms of writing, African literature, African politics, African religion, in terms of Islam and whatever, he made enormous contributions in that field. In terms of legacy, what would you say his legacy has been?
I think that there's no question that he would be remembered as one of those people, like I said, who was fiercely Pan-Africanist. He was a bridge builder. He was a uniter. He was not a guy that would be supporting, for example, the United States President's project. I'm talking about the war that obviously President Donald Trump would like to build south of the United States, preventing people from Latin America and what have you coming to the United States. He was not that kind of person. He was a person who wished everybody well. He was a person that was very easily accessible. He was a person who always looked at you and looked for something good in you so that he can praise it. Just like, of course, the award-winning author, Alex Haley.
One of his favorite.
The author of Roots, of course. The author of Malcolm X, who said, find something good in someone and praise it. That was the type of person Suleiman Nyang was. You
know, speaking of the Roots, one of the gifts that he gave me when I first met him and started interacting with him was that book authored by Alex Haley, The Roots.
Really?
Absolutely.
And you know, of course, it triggered, a series of television, documentaries and all kind of stuff, programs and whatever, which were also equally award-winning. And I should also note, by the way, that, again, Suleiman Nyang will probably be remembered for participating in a major Straight Talk Africa edition, which was in 2001, when a Ugandan major opposition figure, Colonel Dr. Chiza Besigye, retired, but certainly not tired, in Studio 18 at the time, and along with, of course, the then Ugandan ambassador, Edith Bafakulera Sempara, plenipotentiary extraordinary. Here we were in Studio 18, talking about, analyzing about Yoweri Museveni, the Ugandan president at the time, and talking about how it was incredible for Besigye to have been able to escape from Uganda and end up in the United States, in Washington. So anybody writing a book about such an incredible, historic Straight Talk Africa edition will always, of course, look at Suleiman Nyang as one of the key participants in that program.
Before we move on to the other topic, what would you like your fans, especially people who watch Straight Talk every Wednesday, how would you like your fans to remember Dr. Suleiman Nyang?
I think that if I had a way of putting it, I would say that my fans should look at an individual who always wanted and always was able to, at least in my view, was willing and able to offer his best. He was, mind you, the person that believed in being the best that he could be. And there's no doubt in my mind that intellectually he was able to meet that type of threshold.
To be honest with you, I can testify that I learned a lot from just interacting with him, getting to know him on a very personal level.
I did too. Like I said earlier, among other things, frankly, he was my teacher. He was, in a way, somebody that inspired me. And frankly, he taught me how to be simple, firm but simple, and to exude humility, and to be a bridge builder, not a wall builder.
That's a perfect segue to our next segment. You're talking about a bridge builder. Let's go to Ethiopia. The reformist Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who is once again cracking the whip for the first time. This is a guy who came in. We have a female president now in Ethiopia. We have a female High Court, Supreme Court judge.
Or is it the Chief Justice?
Yes, president of the judiciary there. We have 10 female cabinet members out of 20, making it a 50-50 split.
Are you surprised that he actually does have a soft spot for people who happen to be female?
That's why I called him a bridge builder.
But have you not heard the story about his mother? His mother, at the time when Abiy Ahmed was 7 years old or young, his mother told him that he would be the 7th ruler or leader of Ethiopia.
Wow.
His mother.
What do you make of him? What do you make of his policies, these changes, these reforms that he's bringing in Ethiopia?
I think, one, obviously, when you're talking about politicians, you're talking about leaders and what have you, one has to be very cautious, or at least cautiously optimistic. But I think that when you look at what this man has been able to accomplish in such a very short time, you would definitely have to look at him as someone that increasingly looks like a legitimate new breed of African leaders. And I think, frankly, a lot of leaders on the African continent, and even those who are yet to be leaders in terms of being presidents or prime ministers, should take a cue from Abiy Ahmed. Look at the manner in which he is cracking against corruption, for example. Look at these top security officials and what have you, who he has apprehended and all kind of stuff. It's not simply because he doesn't like them. It's because he says, or he alleges, and he seems to have the evidence to boot, that these people have actually been, in a sense, they have been benefiting from an industry of corruption.
How about, let's go to a comment here about, in Ethiopia, actually from Ethiopia. Let's go to Fru Bekele in Ethiopia. What do you think about Abiy Ahmed's policies in Ethiopia, especially in light of the arrests that were made earlier today of several military and intelligence officers?
I think, frankly, first of all, the jury is already out. If he does have evidence, which he says he does, and he probably does, because after all, he used, in fact, to be heading the, the intelligence service and all that kind of stuff. If he does have the evidence, he has to make sure that these individuals have the benefit of due process. Take them through the process, the due process, and let the courts decide based on evidence. Let the court decide their fate.
Let's go to another comment here. Let's go to Godfrey in Uganda. Do you see any young leaders becoming presidents given the level of militarization and commercialization of politics in Africa?
You know, first of all, let's face it, society is not static. Society is dynamic. And for that reason, I see young people, I see people reflecting the changing demographics in tandem with social media. I see them taking their leadership roles in society on the African continent, and in fact, making a huge difference, making things work differently from the way, for example, my generation has actually done.
You are watching Shaka Extra Time. Shaka Sali himself is back in studio and is taking your questions. Today we are talking about a wide range of issues. As we speak now, we are talking about Ethiopia. Let's go to another comment here. Do you think Abiy Ahmed, this is a commenter on Facebook, do you think Abiy Ahmed is the kind of leader that Ethiopians have been waiting for?
Well, I don't know whether it is Abiy Ahmed or whether it is someone else, but at least now we do have some tangible evidence. We do have incontrovertible evidence in the person of Abiy Ahmed. And so far, in such a very, very short time, if you can imagine the sort of significant reforms that he has been able to embark on, the fact that he has had the courage, he has had the wisdom, he has had the opportunity to acknowledge, for example, the role that women play. And he has been able to reach out to them so that together with their main counterparts and what have you, can develop Ethiopia. I mean, Ethiopia is an ancient country. It started with being an empire. It was ruled by essentially people who you would call emperors, really. You know, you had Emperor Haile Selassie, for example, the last one, in fact. He also did his part, because let's face it, perhaps without Haile Selassie, you probably wouldn't have had the Organization of African Unity being born back in 1963, and later, of course, which evolved into the African Union.
He was a visionary.
He was a visionary.
It's like Africa needed a capital, a place where they can come together and sit and talk about their own issues.
Alongside, of course, people like the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the kid from Nkrofo, and people like Colonel Gamaro, Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and people like Ben Bera of Algeria, you know, to name a few. So I think that Abiy Ahmed, like I said, can possibly be looked at really as a legitimate new bleed, not only of Ethiopian leaders, but in fact of African leaders. When I talk about that, I'm reminded of the expression, a new bleed of African leaders, which was coined here in the nation's capital, Washington, during the Clinton administration, referring to specific African leaders then, beginning from Asmara in Eritrea. You're talking about a man called Isaias Afwerki. You're talking about south of that, it was Meles Zenawi in Addis Ababa. And then you went down farther south, you're talking about Yoweri Museveni in Kampala. And to a certain degree, they even talked about Laurent Desire Kabila in Congo Kinshasa. You might have said also, probably added, Paul Kagame, but Paul Kagame at that time was vice president and defense minister. Obviously, he was the de facto
president,
de facto ruler, really. He was the man that called the shots, even though Pasteur Bizimungu was arguably President Pasteur Bizimungu. He was the guy who had the title with no authority. And those people were a major disappointment, really, because they did not evolve into what was supposed to be a new breed of African leaders changing Africa for the benefit of Africans. They never did that. It seems to me that when you look at Abiy Ahmed, you are looking at something rather unique. And like I said, I think people should actually take a cue from some of these things that this man is doing, because this man is actually making remarkable changes in a country that has never known democracy, for example, since its inception. It may very well be that this actually could very well be the beginning, really, of the end of dictatorship in Ethiopia.
Shaka, it's interesting that you say that. I think let's go to a comment in line with Pan-Africanism. This person wants to know, Alex Luyima, can Africa develop without help from outside, considering that Abiy Ahmed is making all these changes just within, he hasn't gone outside to seek external help to come and make these changes, which means it's possible for some things to be done in some of these countries. Taking a cue from Abiy Ahmed, can Africa develop without external help?
You know, I think most of the things that Africa needs can actually be done by Africans themselves. If there are certain things that Africa needs does not have, of course you can either borrow, or you can import, or you can buy. Because Africa has been playing the role of actually building other nations, other empires, other superpowers. If you look at the incredible wealth of Africa, for example, if you look at coltan, it's a strategic metal that plays a very important role, perhaps, in the production, for example, of the cell phone, the laptop computer. You're talking about X-rays. You're talking about a lot of things. And it is found where? In the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the eastern part of the Congo, where, frankly, if you can go there, and you and I have had the opportunity to go there, and sometimes you can look around and say, wait a minute, how can this possibly be the origin, really, of coltan? How can this be the origin of this and that? Because people, when you look at people in that neighborhood, they do not even look in terms of economics. They do not even look like they actually have an economy built on sweet potatoes. No. And yet, when you look at coltan, you look at the Silicon Valley and all that kind of stuff, you look at incredible lifestyle.
Yeah, and Congo goes beyond coltan. They have a lot of diamonds, they have a lot of gold. Any mineral that you can think of, they have it in Congo.
You name it. I mean, let's face it, when you talk about the nuclear bombs, for example, that the United States used during the Second World War to bomb Japan.
Hiroshima and
Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Guess where the raw material came from, the minerals? From Congo.
Interesting.
From Eastern Congo.
Let's stay in Congo. As we speak, the opposition coalition came up with a fronted leader who was, as of yesterday, we had hoped that the coalition was going to hold. Today, one of the largest opposition parties in Congo said that, led by Felix Tshisekedi, said that they are pulling out of the coalition to front one candidate. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think it should be pointed out that the united, opposition chose an individual by the name Martin Fayulu, a man from the business background and all the kind of stuff. I think that Tshisekedi and your friend Vital Kamerhe, I gather that both have decided that they're not going to play ball. But guess what? There have been some demonstrations, as a matter of fact, in some parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And these people were actually saying that these two individuals, you're talking about Kamerhe and Felix Tshisekedi, that these are traitors. Because let's face it, I don't know, obviously, whether the process of choosing Fayulu, to what extent was democratic and what have you, But probably they should have actually given the gentleman a chance. Because let's face it, it makes it very easy for the incumbent government's candidate to go through right now. In fact, it's like a major political present that is given.
You mean Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari?
Yes, a man who was a former interior minister for...
Rather Shadre, yeah.
For Joseph Kabila.
Right, right.
Yeah, and of course there are people who say that when you look at that particular gentleman, that you are also reminded of what happened thousands of miles away in Moscow, the Russian capital, when a man called Putin, Vladimir Putin, reached a point where he could not shift to the constitutional goalposts. He decided instead to choose somebody that was very malleable, a man called Medvedev, who actually served as president in an intervening, one term, so that later he actually bounces back as president with obviously some new, remarkable constitutional changes that not only made sure that even the term is prolonged from 5 to 6 or whatever, but also, of course, he becomes the president. So there are people who are actually saying that when you look at what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and when you look at Shadali, that Emmanuel, I think he was called Emmanuel.
Yes.
Emmanuel
Ramazani
Shadari.
Yes.
That you are probably looking at Medvedev, because Joseph Kabila could probably, after one term, bounce back.
But Shaka, we've seen examples of leaders handpicking their successors, and it hasn't worked. We saw a scenario in Zambia a couple years ago where Chiluba was handpicked and it ended up backfiring. We've seen most recently...
Chiluba was not handpicked. It was, in fact, Chiluba who actually handpicked Patrick Mwanawaza.
So we've seen situations like that. Most recently, we saw in Angola where Jose Eduardo dos Santos handpicked J-Lo, and J-Lo has ended up locking up his own kids. We saw another scenario like a week ago in Botswana where former President
Ian
Khama handpicked a successor, and the successor is was out in public at a public forum, lashing out at his predecessor. So the argument you're making there, I see it might not make it in the context of Congo.
Well, you have to take chances. I mean, let's face it, it worked in Moscow, didn't it?
But we are looking at different circumstances here.
Well, there may be different circumstances, but you have to give it a chance, because politics is supposed to be the art of all possibilities. And if it is the art of all possibilities, you have to try.
Okay, very briefly, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow, interestingly, we are talking about how Africans should not put their faith in individual leaders. Rather, they should, in fact, put their faith in building strong institutions. That Africa does not need strong men or strong women. It needs strong institutions.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. It's been nice seeing you again and hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I look forward to another one next week. On that note, thank you so much, and for now, take care. Talk to you next week. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.